A pleasure to be here with you all this morning for several reasons. First of all, it's an activity that will keep us busy for at least an hour, and hopefully will stimulate to think about the Haggadah and Yontov that is creeping up on us. Also, it gives me the opportunity to focus over the last few days on something more than the progress of the virus and its effect on humanity, and specifically on us. My goal this morning is to study with you the Haggadah, not only because it's an integral part of the Seder, but in order to stimulate not only the children to ask questions, since there are many who unfortunately are here without family, children, and grandchildren, but rather to stimulate you to think more deeply about what is being read in the Haggadah. As I will indicate throughout my talk this morning, there's so much more than just a story of the Exodus. There are so many Haggadahs that are printed every year with individuals finding new insights and deeper meaning. This morning, I will only offer you a few, but I hope that it will stimulate you to dig and think deeper on your own. And I thank you for this opportunity and hope that you will gain some insights that you may be able to use at the Seder table.
We've got a couple options, but we'll go.
Can you all hear me at this point?
Email invitation.
You're on the screen, Ted, you're on the screen, but on my main screen, but I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Ted, can you hear me?
I hear you barely,
okay.
Not loud.
Okay, all right.
I can hear you.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, it's fine, because I'm not on my screen. I'm not on the screen itself. I'm on a little corner there, but it's okay. Anyway, let's start off. All right, the first question. Seder. We call this night a Seder, all right? And the question is, at this point, why call this a Seder when it seems to be in disorder? For instance, Shabbos, we have certain procedures that we use on Shabbos, we use on Yom Tov. We make Kiddush, we go ahead and we wash, we go ahead and we eat, we sing Zmiros, we give it to our Torah, and then we go ahead and we bench. That's a Seder. We have a certain organized Seder that we have every Shabbos, and we follow the same Seder basically every Yom Tov. Except on Pesach, what do? We start with Kiddush, right? We wash, and we don't make a bracha, okay? And we don't eat matzah when we wash. We eat a green vegetable, right? We eat the karpas, and we invite people, and then we ask 4 questions. So there seems to be a complete disorder to the whole evening. So the question is, why do we call this actually a Seder at this point? And oh, my phone is ringing, hold on a second. Actually, there are 4 ways of looking at it at this point, okay? 4 answers. First of all, number 1, one of the things that we are told in the Talmud, in the Gemara, that one of the reasons that we have a Seder is that we pass it on to your children, okay? Number 1. How do we get to the children? First of all, by eating that green vegetable, all right? Of course, the child's going to ask you, why are we eating a green vegetable? Then we have the 4 questions, the manishtana that the children ask. Then we also are told about the stealing the afikomen. And then there's always a dialogue between children and parents. That's one of the reasons why we have this order, all right? The second reason is that not only are we supposed to go ahead and just read the Haggadah, we're supposed to go ahead and we should feel that we are actually participating in the idea of leaving Egypt. I don't know if you recall last week, if you listened to Dr. Brunner, he referred to this idea of being a part of what's going on. He called this synchronicity, if I recall correctly. When things are happening in the same time, the same period, that's when we go ahead and we call this as if it's happening at the same time. We're supposed to be able to go ahead and feel that we are going through the process of synchronicity at this point. It's a visceral feeling, okay? And I don't know whether you're aware of the fact, but if you're a Sfard or you have a Sephardic background or Sephardic mishpacha, you're going to find if you're going to be at their Seder, the Sephardim tend to go ahead and to walk around the table with a knapsack on the back to show that they're doing the same thing as the Jews did when they left Egypt. When they were marching out of Egypt, they were traveling, and they're trying to recreate that idea at the Seder table. So to make it feel like it's happening today, okay? The rabbis, another point is that the rabbis embedded a very deep meaning into this Haggadah. And I said this at the beginning, that I want people to come out feeling that they're just not only reading a Haggadah, they're going through it in order to get finished because they have to go through it, but rather it's to delve into it, to find out what are the rabbis trying to say. And finally, Rav Soloveitchik, he looks at this story of Exodus similar to a mitzvah and a practice of the study of oral law. What's pshat? In other words, the Gemara, what do we do basically? We ask questions and we answer questions. Okay, we look at words and we try to analyze words. We try to figure out what is the Gemara trying to say. He says the same thing in the Haggadah. You know, we talk about Haggadah, some of we were brought the fact that some say that the plagues were not 10 plagues, there were 50 plagues. Some say there was, say, 250, and we asked what it means, and we tried to give explanations. This is how we study the Talmud as well. And he feels that basically the whole idea of the Seder is also to replicate the idea of studying a Gemara. And therefore, Seder takes on a completely different picture than the ordinary Yom Tov and Shabbos. And that's why, for instance, if you take a look at your Haggadah, it starts out, I'm trying to find it here in the Haggadah. We start out, the beginning of the Seder, we sing Kadesh Urchatz, and those are 15 steps. And those 15 steps are the exact Seder that we follow throughout the whole Seder, all right? And the concept of 15 is not something unique. We have 15 mentioned in other places as well. For instance, the Ma'alos, the steps that lead from part of the Chutzner of the Beis Hamikdash to the Beis Hamikdash are 15 steps. That's where the Levim stand and they sing while the Kabbanis are being brought. We also have 15 Shehal Malos. So 15 is not an arbitrary number. It means something basically in more than one way, and gives at least it gives us some order to what the Seder is all about. So Seder is not an arbitrary thing. Seder means it's the order that we use in order to go through the Seder night. That's point number one. Let me take a look at the second one, all right? The second point. And by the way, I don't know if you recall, I did this last year. There may be some repetition on this because, frankly, I didn't keep my notes from last year. I should have done that. Would have made life a little bit easier. But anyway, if I repeat something, or if you were there last year and you remember, please forgive me. It could very possibly be that I repeat some of the things with some new additions, etc. I don't remember anymore. That's one thing I can attribute to getting older. Anyway, let's talk about Kiddush, okay? If you take a look at your Kiddush, okay, ordinarily when you say Kiddush, I have it right in front of me, the second part says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher bocha banu mikol omro, monu mikol hashon. Okay, and then as we go on, we say Yishon is Vasov, etc., 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 and then we say again, Kivonu v'charta v'yasanu gidashtem mikol omnim. We twice refer in the Kiddush of Pesach, we twice refer to the chosenness of the Jewish people. We say Asher bocha banu mikol om, and then we say Kivonu v'charta v'yasanu gidashtem mikol omnim. In other words, basically we have two ways of looking at the chosenness of the Jewish people. And the question really is, why is that so important? First of all, that it's mentioned twice. Okay, number one. And number two, basically, why, in other words, if we repeat something in the Kiddush, that has to mean something. Why is there a difference between the two? One is talking in the singular, and one is talking in the plural. What is the difference between the two? And if you will go ahead and if you will analyze it, you're going to find that basically this is a historical note and by the way, this is the same Kiddush that we do every Yom Tov. Okay? The first one refers to Avraham. It refers to Avraham, and it refers to the time post the destruction of the Tower of Babel. If you remember correctly, all the people those days spoke in one language, and Hashem, went after the destruction of the tower, they broke into different groups and they spoke in 70 languages. So when we're talking about Avraham, in this case, he's referring to Asher Bocha Bonu hold on a second. Shabachadam Mikol Amram Tom Mikol Shon. He's referring to Avram, who basically he chose Avram to take him away from the rest of the people at the time, from the 70 language that they were given at that time, and he gave him the language of Rit, I guess of Rit. And the second part refers to not to Avram, but it refers to basically the Jewish people receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. So over there, basically, what are we saying? Over there, you chose us, and not only you chose us, but you made us holy, so to speak. You chose us, and you gave us a nomer of being kadosh. We are holy, holy to Hashem. So these are actually two historical facts that are mentioned within the same, with the same kiddush. And on Shabbos, the interesting thing is that on Shabbos we say just Mekadesh HaShabbos. And the question is basically, why aren't we using it there? Because Shabbos is a separate entity by itself. Now, I want to take a look at the final words of Kiddush as well. The final words of the Kiddush, it says, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael B'Hazmanim, okay? Who sanctified the Jewish people and the seasons and the time, okay? And the question is, why Mekadesh? How do we make a time holy, okay? And again, and obviously the obvious answer is that basically we make Shabbos is a question of time, and we make it Kodesh, holy. And the question really is, Shabbos is the only time that we don't say Mekadesh Yisrael Hazmanim. Mekadesh is the only time we say over there Mekadesh HaShabbos. That's it, period. We don't talk about time at all. And the question is basically why, and you find that non-Jews don't talk about kedushas of time. They talk about, when they consider things holy, they're referring to places. They have their holy places that they pray to and so forth. They basically refer to holy structures, etc. We are referring not only to places, we're referring to time. So how does time exist amongst the Jewish people? As I said before, one of the main things, it plays a major role in the Jewish religion in Shabbos, for instance. When we start Shabbos, for instance, Shabbos is at 7 o'clock. If we light candles, 5 minutes too late, we are Machal Shabbos. Okay, we have to be punctual. We have to be on the minute. So time is very, very important. Not only that, for instance, when we bake matzah, matzahs have to be baked exactly 18 minutes. If we don't bake the matzahs 18 minutes, we go beyond that, or before that, it's still considered chametz. Beyond that, we burn the chametz, so to speak. But the point is, basically, we are very exact, and we go ahead and we make sure that we are exactly on time. So the Jewish religion, basically, for instance, we cannot go ahead and complete Shabbos. If our Shabbos ends at 7:08, we cannot finish it at 7:06. We have to finish it on time. Of course, we can go later. And the same thing with everything else. When we have this man Kriya Shema in the morning. We have a time when we have to say Kriya Shema within a certain time period. If we don't do it, we are yotze with Kriya Shema, but not to the extent that we are supposed to actually do it. We can daven mincha. We have mincha gedola, mincha ketana. Mincha gedola starts at a certain time. Mincha ketana starts at a certain time. We have to follow those times. We can't daven Mariv before we say we can daven, but it's not yotze until we go ahead and we daven Mariv bismano. So in other words, you see that the entire Jewish religion is focused not only on place. We have a Makam Kodesh, we have the Beis Hamikdash, we have our Shul, we have the Makomos that are Kadoshim, but on the other hand, when it comes to living our lives, we live it according to times, and our times basically have a Kedusha to it. A simple question comes up next, okay? why isn't Moshe's name mentioned in the Haggadah? Moshe's name, by the way, comes up as an aside. At one point, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to remember the exact. I think it's you may come across it just mentioned as an aside. But why isn't the name of Moshe more prominent in the Haggadah? Moshe was the central figure of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And why wasn't he part of, mentioned at least once in a way that it was more meaningful? And there are two ways of looking at it. One is a very simplistic way that Moshe basically, this is a retelling of what Moshe told to his children. His children were not at the Yetzias Mitzrayim. His children were Midian. They were away throughout the entire, most of the part that Moshe was involved with Yetzias Mitzrayim, because I sent them there for safety, whatever it was. So Moshe was retelling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim to his children, and therefore we are doing the same thing again. But that's a very simplistic point of view. The Meforshim bring other reasons, and one of the main ones is simply because, like it says in the Haggadah, you'll come across it, Ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf, anihu v'lo shliach. In other words, basically Hashem is telling us, something, Moshe may be a central figure in this entire picture, but ultimately when it comes down to it, who is the one who's taking you out? The one who's taking you out is Hashem. Ani v'lo saraf, ani v'lo malach. It is me who's taking you out, is making sure that you come out of Egypt and you are on the way to Mount Sinai, okay? By the way, I apologize to you that I'm not having any questions and answers, because if I'm going to do that, we're not going to get very far, and I want to cover a number of points tonight before we finish. So please forgive me for not opening this up for discussion. Excuse me. I'm trying to go along with the Haggadah as we are moving, because that's usually most of the discussion, even at every Seder home, is usually near the beginning of the Haggadah, because as we move on, we begin to move faster, and we're trying to get to eat, and we're trying to get finished. So most of the focus of most families, I would say, is probably on the first part of the Haggadah. So that's why my focus at this point is also on the beginning of the Haggadah. The next issue that comes up, and that's the first question that the child asks, karpas. What is karpas? We take a piece of vegetable, okay, we wash beforehand, basically we don't make a bracha because it's not a kazayis, and we don't bench after. So we eat karpas, we eat a piece of celery or whatever people use for karpas. Some people use a potato, some people use something else, but anyway, basically we eat this vegetable called karpas. And the question is why, all right? So one of the reasons that's given, which is a very simple one, is because basically it raises the curiosity in children. Why are we eating this stuff? Okay, usually the father says make a bracha before you eat this. We don't make a bracha. Okay, it's a very small piece. And also, why is it called karpas? We rarely use this term karpas. And it's a very strange term. Where's the origin of the word karpas? And third of all is, again, why do we start the Seder with karpas? Of all things, what's so dramatic about karpas that we start the Seder with this? Anyway, let me see if I can give you some of the answers. And one of the answers, we can start with basically, where does the word come from? There's only one other place in the Tanakh, by the way, where the word karpas is mentioned. That's in Megillas Esther, where it describes the garments that are worn by Achashverosh, okay? It talks about, I don't remember the words, karpas, I'm trying to remember the words of the Megillah itself. I should have made a note of it basically, but it talks about his garments and it mentions the word karpas, okay? And chur kapasut cheles, I don't remember the words exactly, but whatever they are, it mentions the word karpas, okay? And then we also find that when Yosef received that multi-colored garment from his father, that he showed that he loved his son, Rashi mentions on the describing this garment that he wore, he mentions the words it was made of karpas and cheles. there also he mentions the word copper. So copper actually means, it refers to the purple color. But those are the only times that the word copper is mentioned in the Chumash or Navi altogether. Okay. So the question, all right, so we know now what copper is. We know it's mentioned more than once, all right, in regard to the garment of Yosef. But why is copper brought here altogether? What's the purpose of this? So that the Rabbanan wanted to bring out this whole story of Yosef. Why? Because this karpas, this garment that was made of karpas, was a source of the problem amongst the brothers with Yosef. Yaakov made one big mistake. He played favoritism. Okay, he went ahead and he did for Yosef what he didn't do for anybody else. And there was a certain amount of enmity that developed between Yosef and his brothers. This was one of the issues that was involved. So as a result of this, basically, what happened, we had an enmity, and as a result of that, Yosef was being sold as a slave to Egypt, and the end result was our coming to Egypt. From there on, we ended up being slaves in Egypt. So in other words, our whole being in Egypt, our whole being in slavery, is a result, indirect result of Yaakov's favoring of Yosef, which led ultimately to us to Mitzrayim. Not that we were not supposed to be there, because Avraham was already told way back that we're going to be in servitude. But this process started with Yosef, with the brothers hating Yosef, and Yosef being sold to Egypt, and you know the story. I don't have to go over that again. And so since this whole Pesach story started with this unity, there had to be some sign of unity. The rabbis felt there had to be some sign of unity to make up for this unity. So the end result was that when the Jews left Egypt, before they left, they celebrated Pesach. What did they do? They were told to go ahead and take blood, smear it on the wall, and they were supposed to go ahead and bring a Paschal lamb. What was the idea of the Paschal lamb? The idea of Paschal lamb was to invite the whole family to sit and eat together, to show that there is unity and love amongst the Jewish people. So the rabbis brought this whole story of karpas in order to teach us a lesson, that the Jewish people, in order to be able to be successful and the Jewish people to function, they had to have some unity. So even though there were situations which lend themselves to this unity, they had to make every attempt to go ahead and to make up for it and to show that there was unity amongst the Jewish people. Pesach is a yontif of unity. Pesach is a time when we invite children. It's a Pesach when we invite grandchildren. It's a Pesach when we invite all kinds of friends, etc., to show that the Jewish family is a unified family. In fact, when they used to bring the Korban Pesach, they not only invited family, they invited all their friends to make sure they had enough people to go ahead in order they invited all their friends in order to make sure that they were enough people to go ahead and eat the Korban Pesach. But this was a good sign and a healthy sign. That's why they started with karpas, to teach us that lesson. And also another reason is because during the Pesach Seder, we dipped twice. Okay, we dipped, and the dipping twice refers to the dipping of the blood by the brothers, and also the second dipping refers to the blood that we smeared on the doorpost. So the karpas served two purposes. Number one, the idea of unity, of shalom between one and the next one, and also the dipping showed that basically, even though it started again with Yosef, with the dipping of the garment into the blood to show their father, we have now the dipping of blood to show that we are ready to leave Eretz Mitzrayim in a united way. Okay, let's move on to the next issue. The next thing in the Haggadah, let me take a look over here. We're talking about, hold on a second. We come to Holach Ma'anya, okay? Again, Holach Ma'anya leads us right into the Seder, and it's unique in certain ways. First of all, it's the only paragraph that's written in Aramaic of the entire thing, all right? number one. Second of all, there are a number of questions that come up because of this, okay? Not because it's Aramaic, but basically what's the whole purpose of it? If you take a look at, we extend an invitation to people, except there's only one problem. At this point, we are already sitting down to the Seder. We're not in shul anymore. We're not anywhere, but we are at the Seder table. And we say, anybody who wants to come, everybody who's in need, anybody who wants to go ahead, come and join us can join us. Who are we talking to? We're talking to the kids. We're talking to the adults. We're all there basically. We don't really mean what we say. Okay, so what's the purpose of the language in here, which says that we invite everybody to the to this meal, and then afterwards we say Hashta Avda L'Shon Haba B'nei Chorim. First of all, L'Shon Haba B'Yerushalayim. Okay, next year we should be in Yerushalayim. That's a very good point. And we at the end of the Seder we say L'Shon Haba B'Yerushalayim. But why do we say it here? Well, it doesn't belong here at the beginning of the Seder. It belongs later on. And also next we say Hashta Avdei L'Shon Haba B'nei Chorim. In other words, today we are slaves, and L'Shon Haba we're going to be B'nei Chorim. Who said we are slaves? We're not slaves. We basically are free people. So what the whole thing is very confusing. And the question is, what really what is the purpose of Holach Ma'anyo? So first of all, the first answer is why is it in Aramaic? The main reason is because basically the Holach Ma'anyo was not included in the Haggadah early on. It was added on later on. To show that it was later on, they pointed out, they wrote it in Aramaic to point that it's not really part of the original Haggadah. And matzah now basically, when we're talking about matzah, we're talking about it represents the Korban Pesach that was brought in the ancient days. So after the destruction of the temple, we refer to matzah, which is the afikomen. And by the way, just as an aside, anything that was in the Mishka, in the Beis Hamikdash, we're not allowed to duplicate. So for instance, if we put up a menorah, the replica of a menorah, whereas in the Beis Hamikdash we had 7 candles, usually in the shul we find only 6 candles. And also, okay, number one. Number two, the idea is the fact that we called ourselves slaves. We're not referring to actual slavery, but we're talking about the fact that we are psychological slaves in a sense. In other words, as long as there's no temple, as long as we are not in Yerushalayim, we are basically not really free. So we highlight all this in Aramaic to, as I say, just as a sort of an educational thing that we can learn from what we have said over here. There's one more point that I want to make on Kol Dichfen Yesav Yechol, on this invitation that we hand out in the Holach Ma'anyo. And that is, we say, Kol Dichfen Yesav Yechol, anybody who are hungry, come and eat. And then we say, all who are needy, Kol Ditzrach Yesav Yechol, all who are needy, join our Pesach. In other words, basically, we're saying the same thing twice. Why did we repeat ourselves in the Holach Ma'anyo? All who are needy and all who are hungry. Why do we do this? Rabbi Riskin gives an explanation, and he says that basically we are talking to 2 different kinds of people. Excuse me. We are talking to 2 different kinds of people. On one hand, we're talking to people who are really hungry that you should come and join us. And the other ones are referring to a different group. We're talking about people who are very well off, okay, but they don't have the background of Pesach. So we're trying to go ahead and attract people in order to draw them closer to Yiddishkeit. So we're trying to attract people who don't necessarily have the training and the learning in order to bring them closer to Yiddishkeit. So we invite them to a Seder so that we can possibly go ahead and bring them closer to Yiddishkeit. So he says that that's the way Rav Riskin interpret the double lashon in Holach Ma'anyo. Okay, let's now move on to the Manish Tana, which is one of the highlights of the Haggadah. And as I said earlier, the Gemara says that basically we should focus on the children, and one of the way to focus is on the Manishtana. You know, the Manishtana is said by the youngest one at the Seder table. If there's only one person, believe it or not, you're supposed to say the Manishtana as well. And today we hear the Manishtana in different versions. Some people like to say it in Yiddish, some say it in Spanish, whatever language they want to, but basically that seems to be a very, very important part of the Seder. And the question is, why, we assume that children are supposed to say this. The youngest one, for instance, anyways, between the age of 4, 5, 6, or 7 is supposed to say this. But if you take a close look at the 4 questions, those are not questions that children would ask. I mean, take a look at number 1. Right? How does a child know, first of all? The child is there. He sees matzah. He doesn't see chametz at all, okay? And how does he know, basically, that that all we're going to eat is matzah? Maybe they're going to bring bread to the table. A child of 5 years old is not going to be able to foretell what's going to be in the rest of the meal. The same thing with all the other questions. He only saw karpas. He hasn't seen mora yet. How does he know that we're going to eat mora, etc.? With the same, the third question and with the fourth question. So really the question is, what then is the meaning of these 4 questions when they really are not questions that should be asked by a child, because a child really is not capable of asking a question like this? So there are several answers to this. I'm going to only quote basically the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel lived in Italy. He lived there in the 15th century, and he explained the following. He said, first of all, he said you have to understand that Manishtana is not just for children. Manishtana has a much deeper meaning. And what is the meaning? He says, he explained that these 4 questions are not 4 independent questions. Actually, it's one question. It's one overriding question. And that is, why is this night of Pesach different from every other Jewish yontif? In other words, this yontif is different. How is it different? Let's take a look, okay? Every holiday, every yontif that we have has a unique symbol, okay, has a unique symbol. On Pesach, we have contradictory symbols. Let me give examples, okay? Rosh Hashanah, we have a shofar, okay? And we eat varying foods, etc. I'm not going to explain which one are Rabbanan and which one is Min Torah, but basically Rosh Hashanah, the shofar is one of the symbols. Yom Kippur, what do? We fast, and we have other prohibitions. We wear kittel, we can't wear shoes, etc. This is the symbol of Yom Kippur. Sukkot, as you know, Sukkah, the main symbol is the Sukkah and the Abba Minim, all right? Shavuos, Shavuos, we eat dairy foods. We learn Torah all night. That's the symbol of Shavuos. Chanukah and Purim, Chanukah, we light candles. Purim, we have Shalach Manos. So in other words, every yontif has its specific symbols that represent the yontif. Now let's get back to Pesach. How is Pesach different? Abba Manel says it's different. Why? Because Pesach, these symbols contradict each other. For instance, matzah and mora, okay? A matzah on one hand, matzah and mora are symbols of a poor man's bread and slavery, and yet we dip, okay, and recline. What are dipping and reclining are signs of wealth, okay? So we have a symbol of slavery and poverty. On the other hand, we have the symbol of freedom and wealth to feel like free people. So he basically says that the idea, we have a conflict. And now the question is, okay, how do we deal with this conflict? On one hand, we have every yontif has its symbols that are straightforward. And why do we have a contradictory symbol for the Manishtana? So the answer is basically the following paragraph that follows the 4 questions. And what is that? Avodim hoyinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu v'osem misham. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord our God took us out from there, etc., etc. So in other words, basically we have a contradiction, because basically we were slaves, and we were free. That's our, and we're constantly reminded the fact that we went through a period of difficulty, but we ended up eventually being free people and moving on with life. Okay, now we'll move on to the next issue, and this time I'm going to skip over to Rabbi Akiva. Hold on to Rabbi Akiva and Bnei Brak. Okay, hold on a second. Let me just move over with my Haggadah. Hold on a second. Okay. Oh, this is right after one of you. I don't know what I was turning my pages for. It tells us that there was a Maisa with Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Loza ben Azayev, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tafan, Shohayim Mesubim b'Bnei Barak. They were gathered in the city of Bnei Barak. They were talking about Yitzias Mitzrayim. And they tell us basically they were made aware of the fact that the morning has arrived. So the question is, what it tells us that they met in Bnei Barak. First of all, why is it important? Why do we have to know that it took place in Bnei Barak? It could have taken place in New York. It could have taken place anywhere else. What makes Bnei Barak so important? The fact that they have to mention the fact that they met in Bnei Barak, number one. Number two, one of the things that has always been a tradition amongst the Jewish people is that they visit their Rebbe on Yom Tov. We find in Europe especially, people used to travel for days to make sure that they could get to the Rebbe to get a bracha on Yom Tov. That was a very important thing. And even way back, in those days, they did the same thing. And amongst those five, the eldest of those five, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Loza ben Azayev, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tafran, the oldest Rebbe amongst them was Rabbi Tafran. And Rabbi Tafran was the one that they used to go travel to see. And Rabbi Tafran did not live in Bnei Brak. He lived in Lod. So if he didn't mention a city where they met, they should have met in Lod. Why Bnei Brak? Okay. To answer this one, you have to go back to a Gemara in Makkas. At the end, when you make a Gemara in a Siyum, when there's a Siyum in the Gemara in Makkas, we always tell the same story over again. It talks about the same five people, the same five Rabbanim, who went ahead and they were walking together and they passed the site of the destroyed Beis HaMikdash, and they saw a fox going through that, through the ruins. And everybody started crying, having tears coming down, except for Rabbi Akiva, who laughed. And the others were perplexed. What made Rabbi Akiva go ahead? What makes you laugh when you see a temple that's destroyed? So what was Rabbi Akiva's answer? That he said that when I saw a fox going through the destruction of the temple, that was predicted by the Navi. If that part of the Nevi'us came true, then the second part of the Nevi'us has to come true also, that eventually the temple will be rebuilt. So that's why Rabbi Akiva was one of these guys who had the ability to face a situation that was depressing and make it and become optimistic. He was able to take things and turn them around. So one of the reasons why these guys, all the five guys, I call the rabbis guys, they're not guys, but they're Rabbonim, the Chashav Rabbonim, why these Chashav Rabbonim didn't want to, they were living through a very difficult times of the Romans. And basically they didn't want to face Pesach. So, with where they were. So they decided to go to Rabbi Akiva because even though he was in Bnei Brak, and they wanted to spend the Pesach with him in order to have a more optimistic outlook on life. And that's why they ended up with Rabbi Akiva. That's the story. That's a popular story. And I'm just retelling you that one. Okay. And now we move on to another phase, which is a very popular phase, and that's talking about the Arba Bonim. Okay, we're talking about the four children. The Chacham Mahu Omer, the Chacham with the wise man, what does he say? The Rasha Mahu Omer, what does the wicked one say? Tom Mahu Omer, he's supposed to be the simple one. And She'eni Yodeh Lishol, then we have a fourth person a child who couldn't even ask the question. And the question basically, usually we picture him as being four sons of the same person. The father had a Rasha in his family. He had a tzaddik in his family, chacham in the family. He had a child who was more a Tom. He was a simple person, and one who was not old enough to even ask. But I saw a different shot, and I think that shot gives us a little bit more insight, and it is more applicable even today. In that rather than having four sons within one family and answering in their own way, like the Russia says, Ma, what does this all mean to you, etc., instead of focusing on them as different children who just had different views, I'd like to consider that we're talking about four generations, okay? In other words, for instance, we had the wise son, all right? The wise son who's Talmid Chacham, a person who's a Talmid Chacham, grows up, marries, and he's a bucket b'shas, etc. And he moves, let's say, he comes to the United States from Europe, and he has a child, and this child basically grows up amongst strange people, different community, and he gets caught up in things, and he doesn't want to follow his father as far as being a Talmid Chacham. So what happens? He basically, we've had this happening when we had the immigration coming to the United States way back when the first generation that came to the United States, they had a very difficult time with observing Shabbos and observing anything at all. And as a result of that, we had the reaction of the older people saying it's Shevetz Yid, and kids used to pick up that message and they turned away from Yiddishkeit. We had a big assimilation as a result of that. So we have this second son, the Russia, who's not interested in following what his father says. Then what happens is that this Russia gets married, okay, and he visits his father every once in a while, and he brings this child along. This child was not brought up was not sent to yeshiva. He was a kid who didn't know anything at all from his father's home, but he comes to his grandfather, and he comes there, let's say for Hanukkah, or he comes there for Pesach, etc., and he sees all that's going on. So the Tom starts asking questions. He says, what does this all mean? How come Zadie's doing this? How come he's doing that, etc.? And he starts asking questions of his father, who really is not too happy about the fact. But basically he cannot prevent the curiosity of a child, and the child gets more interested in it. And then finally we end up with this Tom who really is just beginning to learn about Yiddishkeit. He has a child, a Nebuch, he doesn't have anything at all except for what his father possibly tells him. And it's interesting to note, by the way, today's generation, we have to say, is a replica of the simple son. The whole Baalei Tshuva movement is a result of a generation that grew up amongst families that didn't know anything at all, and they noticed things happening, whether it's on the college campus with the Hillel, or whether it's visiting a Seder or other places. They grew up and started asking questions. It would have been fascinating to make a study, what makes a Baal Tshuva. But today, the biggest movement, one of the reasons Orthodoxy is the fastest growing movement amongst all the Jews today, is because of the Baalei Tshuva movement. So the Baalei Tshuvas are really a replica of the simple son who's beginning to find out what it is to be a Jew, and as a result of that, he turns to Yiddishkeit. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at the four sons, rather than the four sons of one family, rather than having a generation gap between the different sons. Okay, next point. This is regarding the number 4, okay? The number 4, excuse me a second, please. Number 4 seems to be a very prominent role at the Seder. Why? We have 4 cups of wine, right? We have the 4 questions. We have the 4 Lashonos of Geula, Avesi, Atzesi, etc. We have the four languages which describe our emancipation from Egypt. Okay, and then we have 4 matzahs. Actually, we have 3 matzahs at the head of the table. We break 1 matzah in half, so we end up with 4 pieces. So the number 4 seems to have seems to carry a certain cachet, about it. And why is 4 so important? Okay, if we take a look later on at the end of the Seder, we sing the song Echad Mi Yodea. Okay, so what does it say about? If we take a look at this song, Echad Mi Yodea, what does it say about Arba? It says Arba Mi Yodea. Who knows 4? So it says Abba Ni Yodea. I know 4. What are they? Abba Imohos. It refers to the 4 matriarchs. Well, who are the 4 matriarchs? Sarah, Rivka, Leah, and Rachel, right? And basically, these 4 matriarchs, the mothers, basically, according to what we have learned, or what the Gemara, what Mishnah says, the matriarchs, the mothers, are the ones who most influence children to grow properly. What we read in Mishnah, we say, Shema b'ni Musa avicha v'al titosh Torah samecha. What does that mean? It says, Mishnah, the Shlomo HaMelech says, hear, my child, the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the teachings of your mother. Okay, so we learn from that the formal teaching of children is done usually by the father or by the teacher in the day school or by the Rabbi in the yeshiva. The informal teaching values, okay, and teaching how to transmit Yiddishkeit, etc., is done primarily by the mothers. And I think the concept of a 4 is very important in that sense, that basically it's the mothers who are the most important. If you point to the most important individual in the family that transmits Yiddishkeit, it's more the mother, the day-to-day living with the mother, that does more than basically the Rebbe does or the father. And that's, I think, is the point of having the idea of 4. Okay. Now we move on to V'hi She'amda. And hold on a second, let me get the V'hi She'amda over here. Boy, okay, hold on a second. Forgive me, I didn't mark off these places. Okay, who is this? Hisham the Lava saying, all right, anyway, I don't want to go through the whole thing. Anyway, the words for Hisham the Lava Seino is a reminder. Again, this is one of the examples that are of synchronicity that's described by Dr. Brunner when he also used the sentence of Hisham the Lava Seino to remind us that throughout history, the non-Jews always wished to destroy us. This was written 1,500 years ago, and it's still true today. We know basically that we will always have these examples of people rising up and trying to destroy the Jewish people, and that hasn't changed. And unfortunately, I doubt very much whether it's ever going to go ahead and change. All right, now I want to go to something else, which I think is an indication of, hold on a second. Okay, right after V'hi She'amda L'Avoseinu, the paragraph starts with the word Seil Mad. As we mentioned earlier,
we did a different rap today.
As we mentioned earlier, the rabbis wanted us to learn the entire God on a much deeper level, okay? And from Seil Mad, if you take a look at the paragraph, it says, Seil Mad ma bikesh Lavan ha'arami lasos liYaakov Avinu. It tells us that, look, what Lavan wanted to do to our father Yaakov, Sheparo lo goza ela halascharim, because Paro only wanted to kill the male children. Lavan bikesh la'akor sakol. Lavan, on the other hand, wanted to go ahead and destroy.
Scroll up.
Excuse me, do me a favor and try to, I hear you over here, so it's disturbing me a little bit. If you can just hold it to yourself, okay? Anyway, so Lavan wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Well, how do we know that? Shenema Arami Ovid Avi Vayer Mitzram Vayirushamim Saimot Vayisham Legoy Gadol Otzuvarav. So we have to ask ourselves a question. I mean, Lavan, we know Lavan was not of the finest of characters. Okay, Lavan gave Yaakov a lot of problems. He gave him a hard time, but basically what it really ended up to, that Lavan welcomed Yaakov into his home. He gave him a job, okay, for 20 years. He married off his daughters to Yaakov, and so he wasn't the nicest guy in the world. But why call him a Russian? What was the reason for that? Okay, so that's where the Tseil Mad comes in. In other words, you have to look beyond what it says in the words, okay? And if you take a look throughout history, we take a look and see that that things were not so simple between Yaakov, okay? Pharaoh, there were two ways that the Jews had to deal with people throughout history. One way was basically through physical annihilation, and the other through spiritual destruction, okay? Pharaoh, through the Nazis, represented the first. In other words, there were always people throughout history that wanted to destroy us physically. There was never any question about that. Who were the ones who wanted to destroy us spiritually? We had the Syrian Greeks, they want the Hellenists who tried to influence the Jewish people. We had the Romans who didn't want us to learn Torah, that they wanted to destroy us spiritually. And then we had, in the more modern times, we had the Soviet Union. Basically, the Soviet Union gave Jews citizens, but they weren't allowed to study Torah, they weren't allowed to do anything. The only way the Jewish people were able to continue what they did was in secret. They could not do anything. So we had basically a physical threat, and we had this spiritual threat. Okay, in the Torah we have two. One, the physical threat was represented by Pharaoh, and the spiritual threat was represented by Lavan. How? Because if you take a look in the Chumash, at the end of the 20 years, okay, when Yaakov finished working with Lavan, he wanted to return to Eretz Yisrael to fulfill his wish and destiny. When Yaakov left, and he left suddenly because he was afraid of Lavan. Lavan gave him chase, and he gave him chase, he caught him. He had a big, very tough conversation with Yaakov, but at the end they parted with a peace treaty, okay? And even then, while he made the peace treaty between the two, Lavan went ahead and at the signing of the treaty, Lavan purposely recited that this is a treaty under the supervision of God, of Abraham and of Nochar. Nochar was, by the way, Terah's father, to show that they were equals. Jacob didn't let him get away with it. Yaakov said to him, he sealed the treaty with Hashem's name. So we see that Lavan in his own way tried to destroy the Jewish people from within by preventing the return of Yaakov to Eretz Yisrael. And that's why, one of the reasons why the Medrash says that Bilam and Lavan were actually one and the same. We know they were not the same. But what do they mean by that? The Medrash says that these were the two individuals in the Torah who tried to destroy the Jews spiritually. Those are the two who tried to go and destroy the whole concept of Yiddishkeit. Okay, so that's why we say Tseil Mad, and that's why we look at Lavan a little bit more closely than we did ordinarily. Now, for the last thing, I'm going to finish off with going back to the last song of the evening, the Chagadio, which is one of the favorite songs. And just like the Haggadah is finished with Chagadio, I'm going to try to finish with Chagadio, and to try to understand what is the song of Chagadio doing over here in the Haggadah. It seems to have no logical place in the Haggadah because there's no connection to Egypt in any way. Okay, and from a simplistic point, we can say, well, it's to keep the kids up, so therefore we like to sing, etc. That's one way of looking at it. However, there is, again, like Tseil Mad, we know there's a better reason, okay? And we have to look deeper into the whole meaning of what is Chagadio. And I'm going to give one of the answers, even though a number of people give answers to this, and this explanation is given by a Rabbi Bundy. He lived in the 19th century in Germany, okay? And he says that the Medrash tells us a confrontation between Avram and Nimrod. You've learned the Medrash. You've learned about the fact that Nimrod eventually tried to kill Avram by throwing him into the oven with fire. But what preceded was that there was a confrontation between the two of them about talking about God, where Nimrod tried to show Avram that there is a God besides the God that Avram believed in. So what did he say to him? He says, God, fire is God. So Avram answered him, how can fire be God? It can be, doused with water, and that's the end of the God. So Nimrod went out and he said, well, the clouds can be God. So Avram answered him, wind can blow it away, etc., etc. And this went on all along. And we know in frustration, Nimrod tried to kill Avram with the fire, and Hashem saved them. And likewise, when the Jews were asked to sacrifice a lamb for the Korban Pesach, we had a problem because the Egyptians worshipped the lamb. And we had a confrontation between the Egyptians and the Jews. And again, they had the same argument. So the Egyptians wanted to say, basically, you're sacrificing our God. And what did the Jews answer to him? That the cat can eat the lamb. Therefore, how can it be a God? And then afterwards, he said, well, what if we use the cat as a God? So he says, well, the cat can be bitten by a dog. And that's the whole story of the Chagadio. So we see ultimately Hashem is mightier than everyone, including killing of the angel of death. And the idea is that Pesach and the Mitzrayim is the theme of not only of what we learned at the beginning, but also of Chag Gadol. And I look forward to you guys enjoying the Pesach night better as a result of what I've offered you. I hope it'll improve it anyway. And I look forward to Mitzvah Hashem to celebrate with you next year again. Shkoach. Thank you. No, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it anyway.
Shkoach. Thank you all.
Very good.
Thank everybody for participating.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi Dr. Kranzler. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Excellent.
Take care.
Everyone.
Take care.
Okay.